1871. October 1871, over 2 days, the city burned down. Central City to the north, terrible tragedy, 100,000 people homeless, really bad. Well, the city began to rebuild. So what happened was some of the architects and engineers came here for jobs, and some of the most famous names in the history of American architecture did their most important work in Chicago in those decades following the fire. And they perfected a new type of structure. Tribal nation in this particular area. Just before under the bridge on your left over here, this tall, narrow building that has a little bit of peachy color up there. Notice the verticality of that building. It's a great example of an Art Deco building. That's from the verticality as well as some flattened sculptural ornamentation on it. Dinkelberg. This is a firm that did a lot of buildings in Chicago, not as well known as some of the Louis Sullivan, Mies van der Rohe types, but that was from 1926. And it was called the Jewelers Building when it was first constructed. The idea was that jewelers were going to be occupying some of the offices. It didn't actually work out that way, but nonetheless, the building had a really interesting perk until cars got long and fat. And then they couldn't fit in the elevator anymore, so that was the end of that. But it was the first and only building in America that had done that. So now those little things, you've got that kind of Greek architectural influence there. Now up at the very top, that dome up there, used to house something called the Stratosphere Lounge. That was when it was the tallest lounge in the city. And the advertising had this snappy line, there's atmosphere in the stratosphere. I know, they couldn't come up with anything better, I figure. So, but the Jewelers Building is one of the old landmarks of River in any particular way. It was pretty disgusting, you know. And it was designed by Kevin Roche. He's Irish-born architect, Kevin Roche. Now that's the home of the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency. So that's as the stone building where it sets back right next to it. As we're coming close to the bridge, you look at the stone building that has the whiter lighting on it there. It's a very unusual looking shape for a building. It's a city filling in, streets filling in and becoming dark and no air, no lights. This is before air conditioning and before fluorescent lighting. 1930, the LaSalle Wacker building, designed by Halliburton and Root, two of the really famous architects in Chicago history. But if you see the way it sets back, it allows an awful lot of light and air to flow all around the building. Now, if you look up on the very top by the pink lighting, there's a spire up there. And that spire actually used to have a silver ball, mirrored ball up on top of it. It used to be a clue. Boston. These three women have won numerous awards for this incredible amenity that gives us another sort of waterfront in addition to the lake itself. Now, as we go underneath the bridge, you see the lighting here on the walkway, how the sidewalk just kind of wraps around the base of the bridge there and continues on. But that little sidewalk with the lights literally took it around. These are the little fish hotels over here on your left, the Fish Carlton here. They've got these kind of floating islands here. It's hard for fish to gather in other areas of the river, but they got these little floating islands right here. Now we're coming up and we're going to kind of swing around here. On your left side, you're going to notice there's a building that's curving. It's right on the other side of the bridge in front of us. This is a building that's curved toward the bend of the river here. We're getting right now to critics come to Chicago. They look at the latest eye candy, but they always love this particular one right up here. Now, if Mies van der Rohe had been in charge of designing this, he would have insisted on a rectangle. He was the man who loved the rectangle. So coming up, straight ahead, the building rising up in front of us, there's a cutout at the top and at the base, which you'll see when we get a little closer and make our turn ahead of us. They're dealing with trains underneath there. And so what happens here with Picard Chilton Architects, they've set the building back to create about an 1.5 acre park right in fans whirring around. But the trains actually, these are the North Shore commuter trains, go underneath here. Coming up in the distance on your left, it's a red brick building. This is from 1898. And this is a great example of what's now called adaptive reuse, taking an old building and giving it a whole old storage warehouse. It didn't have balconies or windows. The reason they needed such a gigantic freezer is because there wasn't a lot of refrigeration in the late 1890s, and they needed someplace to keep product chilled. So that was fine. It was being until refrigeration came on, but then they didn't need it. This is the Chicago Tribune's printing press building. They print actually the Chicago Tribune newspaper and the Sun-Times and a lot of small dumping ground. It was really dumb when you think about it. I'm talking 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Down on the South Branch, the Union Stockyards, animal parts left over end of the day, dumped them in the river. You'd had storm runoff, you had human waste. This is all flowing east to your left, east out to Lake Michigan and settling in right next to the water intake crib there. And, you know, like, what could possibly go wrong here, huh? So people were not just a few people dying, there were hundreds of people dying from cholera and typhoid, water, and it did connect at the south branch of the river over to the Illinois River. Now, January 1900, the job was done, and they blew the dam that was holding back the south branch, and they stood and watched, and it absolutely worked. The Chicago South Branch River You know, when you've got a city with a river running through the middle of it, you've got to have bridges, right? Pittsburgh, every bridge has these concrete counterweights, and that's how the bridges go up and down. But this is the only one on the river system that actually is visible right there, over there, back there on your left. Now, that's owned by the Union Pacific Railroad Company, and they come through once a year and lower it to test it out, but it's permanently in the upright position. It's a City of Chicago landmark. If it was down, it would be too low. It would be too low for us to get underneath, so they just simply keep it in the upright position. But number 7, Chicago's trunnion bascule bridge, shape of a Y. And so that's number 6 on my list of things to know. The Y shape is the symbol of the city of Chicago. Now, if you're an attorney, it's a municipal device. If you're just like a regular person, it's a logo, a symbol, right? But you see it everywhere once you know about it. Manhole covers, on fencing, everything. For over 100 years. What you've got right here is a noisy train going overhead. That's a double-decker trunnion bascule bridge, by the way. So the reason it was considered an unbuildable site is because of the constraints on the site. You've got that red brick warehouse over there, which is not going anywhere, and that's residential. You've got the double-decker to a very narrow core by gigantic trusses, triangle trusses. So the building, the way it goes, the way it works, is called a core supported structure. It's a very high strength concrete core, and it only takes up about a quarter of this acre lot that it sits on right there. Number 2, it's a grid. It's like a piece of graph paper, right? Left to right, top to bottom, it's the same thing. Number 3, no ornamentation. Office. It was built in 2 parts. You see the long horizontal part was first, and then the corners and the wraparound came 1931. The middle part was 1921, designed by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. It was the largest postal facility in the world, and the reason we needed it, mail order business. Not only then we had Montgomery Ward, pretty soon we had Sears, J.C. Penney, and others, Spiegel, no Chicago, all the way up to Fullerton, which is 2400 north on our traffic grid. 17,000 buildings were burned. A third of the population was homeless. 100,000 people were homeless. At least 300 people died. They have no idea, really, how many people died. There wasn't that good at record keeping to know. Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. And they got 2 incredibly talented men. They got the architect, Bruce Graham, and the engineer, Fazlur Khan. Now, Fazlur Khan was brilliant. He had come from Bangladesh on scholarship to the University of Illinois to study engineering. Within 3 years, Fazlur Khan had earned 2, gives the Sears Willis Tower its distinctive shape. They were dealing with the enemy of tall buildings, which is wind. The taller a building goes, the greater the sway. People don't like sway. They don't like the toilet water sloshing around. So they came up with this idea, this bundled tubes. Fazlur Khan demonstrated. He took a pack of cigarettes and he shook them, and they popped up. And they fell at different levels. And he said, that's what you want to do. You want to confuse the wind when it hits the building. And then after that, a couple of setback, a couple more setback. So when you see the actual top of the Willis Tower, it's actually just 2 of the square bundled tubes that are left up there, building there. So the Martini Glass building, when the building was in the planning stage, they build models of these things, you know, and they do wind testing on them to see what the sway is going to be. And what they learned was that the building coming up here on your left was going to have more sway than people would be comfortable with. And so they did something here that was a first in Chicago. On the very top of the building, they put, so that's from 1930, and that's the famous Merchandise Mart of Chicago, one of the great Art Deco buildings of the world, designed by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. You know, Deco, I said, you know, it's typically a tall, streamlined building. This is a building that is 2 blocks wide, so, but still they've got the emphasis on the vertical line there. So the Mart itself, as it's called now, was built by the Marshall Field Real Estate Trust. Marshall Field was the man who founded our much-loved department store, Marshall Field. It was built as a retail buyer's shopping experience for wholesale buyers from around the country. Totally tanked. It was sold in the 1940s for $13 million to a group of investors that included Joseph P. Kennedy, father of John F. Kennedy. They made this wildly successful home design center, and they sold it for about $600 million in the 1990s. Now, what happens on this building now at night is something, it's a video art program. It's been taken care of now for the past few decades. The Environmental Protection Agency, State's Department of Natural Resources, and then there's a local nonprofit called the Friends of the Chicago River. They're very, very aggressive in taking care of the river. But they've got like 60 species now, fish thriving in the river system, all sorts of critters, raccoons, coyotes, beavers, all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's not even toxic anymore, it's just sort of polluted. This area that you see over here on the right on the Riverwalk, this is for kids to play. It's their fountain there that they can just run around. And this is where they're not selling alcohol or meals or anything else. It's just a place for you to come and enjoy the river and watch it all go by. And the lighting that they have there is up there, is called it's a ramp there. But this is a great spot. The trees that you see over there are actually planted down in the ground. They're not in planters. So they've already doubled in size, and they're going to lend a beautiful, cute little name. So these are from the late 60s, 1960s. It was just amazing. You know, Bertrand Goldberg believed this idea that people should live in the city and not flee to the suburbs. But he knew you've got to have enough things to make it possible to live. So grocery store, everything people would need there. I think they had a skating rink also. Plus they have a marina, of course, for your yacht. But he loved working with the round shape. And they were apartments initially when it opened in the 1960s, and they have since been converted to condominiums. But you can get this sense about their studio, 1 and 2 bedroom, and each one you have that rounded leaf, like a little leaf on a tree. They've got a core going, concrete core right up the center of the building here. But they were sold out immediately, and this is the late 1960s. This was the first residential building downtown Chicago to encourage people to live in the city, and it was a success from the very beginning. It was sort of like not for big families, though. You know, this is more for custom steel. This is Mies van der Rohe's own design here. It's from 1971, here back behind the AMA Plaza. It's from 1971. It was built for the IBM Corporation. It's now the AMA, American Medical Association, headquartered in the Langham Hotel on the base there. But you know, when you've seen all this other eye candy, and then you come back to these buildings, they're very beautiful and just very simple, minimalist, which is exactly what he hotel on the lower part and condominiums up above. Smith did a kind of interesting thing, though. You can't even tell the color right now. It looks like this kind of gray, but it's a kind of a blue-gray. It kind of really blends into the sky no matter what's going on. So he chose that color there. And then the vertical, very fine vertical line up the face. He has his own firm here now, Adrian Smith plus Gordon Gill, the two of them together. So here we are back. We've got 20 minutes left. Some of you have been sucking down some beer there. You might want to hit the heads, as they're called in the boat world. Back at Wrigley here, there's the flying buttresses of the Tribune, and then behind that on the left, the purpley color up there, that's the Intercontinental Hotel on Michigan Avenue. But in 1929, when it was completed, it was the Medina Athletic Club. It was designed by Walter Allschlager, and it's just totally over the top Moroccan sort of style design inside. It's worth going and taking a self-guided tour of it. On your left, back here in the museum building, says Fidelity. So, this gives me a chance to say something about women in architecture. Architecture has been kind of tough for women traditionally. Wasn't easy for them to get credit, wasn't easy to make partner, and that's changed a lot. You do have women who are part of the tour. These women never got credit for this in their lifetime, so give them a round of applause because they really deserve it. Nice job, ladies. This baby University of Chicago building there from 1993. It's the Booth School of Business, which is typically called the #1 business school in the world. Has nothing to do with the fact that my husband's on the faculty. But anyhow, that's designed by Dirk Lohan, who's the grandson of Mies van der Rohe. How cool is that, right? And then here, lighting up the sky with the gold lights. This is the NBC Tower designed by Adrian Smith. Now, halfway up, there's that bent arm shape, like flying buttresses. One of the things that Smith is doing with the architecture and the design of this building is paying honor to buildings nearby. halfway up those flying buttresses, what he's doing is giving a shout out to the top of the Tribune building over there that has flying buttresses. These are actually holding the wall up. And also the vertical line that you see on this, what he's referencing is the parent company of NBC. If you've been in New York, it's the Rockefeller Center right there. This is what he's calling. He calls it heritage architecture, referencing. It has the unusual wavy balconies. So this is Jeannie Gang of Studio Gang. That's her building Aqua from 2009. She's one of the stars of the world of architecture, not just because she's a woman, because she does some really interesting designs. One of the things Jeannie Gang is really interested in, she has this philosophy of saying, how does architecture connect people rather than isolate them? She's really concerned about the idea that people get in high-rise buildings and they become isolated. So her building Aqua, with its undulating balconies, there's no barriers between each of the units. So you go out on your balcony and you're expected to see your neighbor and say hello, and that's part of what she wants you to do. Now, Jeannie Gang is also behind this three-stem tall building that you've got right here. So this is the St. Regis Chicago. The lower, it's all condominiums. There's three stems that go all the way up there. Now at the very top, I think you can kind of tell, there's a double floor up there that has no windows in it. It's called a blow-through floor. And the reason is because, you know, they put a liquid tuned damper up there, but they still, in their studies on the building model, they're still going to have too much sway. So they did this blow-through floor all the way up there. It looks like that double height floor. It's the 83rd floor. It's kind of first in Chicago. New York has If you study Chicago history, the one thing you hear a lot about is that Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. The city has 77 actual community areas on the official city map, but and most people who grew up in Chicago know there's lots of little neighborhoods within that. But what I think is interesting is that they're still adding neighborhoods here. This one's recent here on your left. This whole grouping of high-rises over here on your left is Lakeshore East, and this is new since 2002. So for most people, there was never an east side of the city, really, but now there is. If you go to Michigan and Randolph and you go out east, you'll come here to Lakeshore East. So you've got condominiums and apartment buildings, townhouses, etc., and they're all clustered around about a 6.5. We didn't go far enough down the South Branch for me to show you, but there's a tract of land down there along the South Branch of the river, a little farther than we went, and they're developing in the 78, meaning the 78th community for the city. I imagine it may come up with another name, but for now that's what they're going with. See the angles there on Jeannie Gang's building? See how graceful it is? And it's actually, there's no curves in any of the glass there. It just steps back a few inches as it goes up and down. Jeannie Gang's philosophy is, how does your building connect people rather than wall them off? So rather than making it very exclusive, it's meant to be a pass-through there for people over in Lakeshore East as well as going into it.